Mark 9, 2 through 13 is our first scripture we're going to look at. That's great. 6 days later, you'll have to read chapter 8 to know what that later is about. I'll let you do that on your own. But in 9, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw none of them there anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. Then they asked him, "Why did the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" And he said to them, "Elijah is indeed coming first to restore all things. How then is it written about the Son of Man that he is to go through many sufferings and be treated with contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has come." And they did to him whatever they pleased, as it was written about him. And then they all come down the mountain, and they join their friends. Now, a lot of times when you read this story, we focus on Peter and his ambitious self wanting to build 3 dwellings, and he didn't quite get it. And we talk about the voice, and we talk about lots of things. This is the last Sunday of Epiphany, before we enter into the season of Lent. And on this Sunday, we typically do recall this transfiguration of Jesus, the revealing of Jesus through a mystical and divine metamorphosis that lasts probably a micro moment in time, but intersects with the divine, where the divine lives outside of time. So it's both time and timeless. But instead of dwelling on some of those more typical focus areas, we're going to talk about a few other things. The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell of this account. It's pivotal for James and John and Peter, who Jesus brought up the mountain with him. One thing that's curious to me is that in the Gospel of John, now that's a gospel that's honored to have John's name, John the Apostle. Unlikely written by him, but probably written by someone of the Johannine theology long after John had been dead. So in the gospel named for John, this account isn't told, and he was there. The title of my sermon is Deep Mysteries, and for me this is one of those. How in the world is such a pivotal account in someone's life could it not be told in the book that is named after them? It had to have been a foundation of the Johannine theology. Johannine means the theology of John. So I'm guessing, like I mused last week, that possibly it's not there in that account because the writer of that gospel knew it was in the other synoptic gospels and said, well, I've got a lot to write here. There's so much. I'll just count on them reading it over there. It'll be assumed that people will know about this transfiguration, but that's just a guess. It's still kind of a mystery to me. Another mystery is the focus on Elijah. Mark and Matthew have this focus, not Luke. The teaching is that Elijah must come before Messiah. If Jesus is the Messiah, where's Elijah? One understanding of this is that John the Baptist functioned in the role of Elijah. But in true Jesus fashion, we don't know this for certain. These things are not clear-cut. Not like we'd like them to be. People don't come with these little name badges that say, "Hi, my name is John the Baptizer, and I'm here to fulfill the role of Elijah." That would be handy, wouldn't it? Another mystery. Jesus tells Peter and John and James to not tell anybody what they've seen until the Son of Man rises from the dead. So let's say that with me, you and another of our friends goes up a mountain and sees something absolutely amazing, and then we're told, don't tell anybody until this thing happens that you won't know, that you don't know what I'm talking about is going to happen. And then you go down the mountain to be with your other best friends. Hey, what happened up there? Stuff. I can't tell you. How hard is that? It's kind of mean. Come on, you're my friend. What happened up there? Jesus said stuff. We sat there and I said something about making tents. You know, I mean, what are you going to say? So that, to me, is a mystery. Why would Jesus do that? And the other mystery is, did they? Did they not tell? Or did they go, okay, I can tell you, but don't tell anybody. Don't, oh, I won't, except for you, because I know you won't tell anybody. Isn't that what happens? Deep mystery. What do we do with these deep mysteries? How can we understand them? How do they change us? Genesis 32. A guy named Jacob. You might be familiar with Jacob. He was on his way back home to the country of Edom, where he hoped to reunite with his estranged brother Esau. Sound familiar? He was afraid because he wasn't sure if his brother was going to receive him or kill him. Because he pulled a lot of stunts on his big brother. Taking his birthright was one of them. As he neared home, after several years of being away, this is what happened. Verse 22. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. So everything that he owned and all of his people are on the other side of something that he calls a stream here, but I'm sure it was not just like a little trickle. And there's Jacob alone. A man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. Jacob's hip was pulled out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Now remember, they've been wrestling together, and they were pretty well evenly matched. Although not at all, because the man just touched Jacob's hip socket, made it go out of joint, and Jacob is still like, "I am not letting you go until you bless me." No. So the man said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Fantastic story. Israel limped for the rest of his life. But he would not give up. The name Israel can be broken down to mean wrestle and God. El means God. El Shaddai. Israel. Wrestle. God. In some ways, so did his forebears, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. Jacob's hand-to-hand wrestling match with God, brought about by God's initiative, Jacob didn't send everybody on the other side of the river and then fall down on his knees and go, I need to talk to you. He just sent everybody away. He needed to be alone. The man came to him, initiated the fight. This sets the stage for our relationship with God. We can look back at so many of our ancient stories and we see humans striving with God. Job, classic example is Job. He did not sin in arguing. People like to say that Job sinned. I don't ever see where it ever says that Job sinned. He argued with God. And God set him in his place. He was wrestling. And he wasn't giving up. Just like Jacob. Matthew and Mark have a story about a woman who was not Jewish. One of them, she's Syrophoenician. One of them, she's a Samaritan. She argued with Jesus. My daughter needs a healing. Heal my daughter. This is what Jesus tells her, you might recall. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Wait a minute, is that my Jesus? Did my Jesus say that? She said, yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And then Jesus answered, woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was instantly healed. Now, that sounds downright mean, doesn't it? Where's the love I always talk about? Oh, Jesus loves you. It is not right to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. What about the Good Samaritan and who is your neighbor and all of that? Same Jesus? I have struggled with this for years and years and years. This story has gotten me so angry, so sad, so confused. But I feel like I understand something about this moment that I didn't see before. And it all happened because of this link with the transformation and thinking about wrestling with God, with Jacob. I think Jesus and this woman were wrestling. They were in a relationship that had been ongoing since the beginning of their faith journey. Jesus initiated a wrestling match with the woman. And the woman came back and said, I will not let go unless you bless me. Transfiguration is a mind-blowing event. We seek to understand it, to learn it. Maybe we are instead called to wrestle with it. Sometimes I think we're too polite with God. It's important to be kind. It's important to be generous. It's important, all of those things that, think on these things. But sometimes with God, I think we're too polite. I'm not encouraging us to be impudent or arrogant. But when God shows up, sometimes it's to wrestle. In that wrestling, we find out a lot about God. But we also find out a lot about ourselves. Sometimes we may be given a new name. Sometimes we might be asked to hold in our hearts a deep mystery like James and John and Peter. And to wrestle with that mystery inside of us. In that holding, what do? Do we hold it respectfully? Do we hold it gingerly? Or do we allow it to advance upon us and engage us? Do we wrestle with it? God doesn't need for us to be polite. God doesn't need for us to be uber religious. God needs for us to be real and authentic and tenacious. I think that's why Jesus only chose Peter and James and John. Because they were ready. They were wrestlers. They were the wrestlers of the group. They were rough and they were awkward. Peter, the one that was always ready to fight and come to Jesus' defense. And James and John were called the sons of thunder. Because they couldn't control their anger. They were very often inappropriate. And they were corrected a whole lot of times. And yet Jesus said, yeah, you three, I want you to see this. I want you to participate and experience something. They got corrected, but they were called. They experienced the divine intersection of who Jesus was. So I want to be called up to the mountain. I don't want to manipulate God. I want to find out what God is looking for. And I think it's not a bunch of religious and pious and polite people. I think it's people who are tenacious and who are wrestlers. Anna Lichty, in one of her posts recently, and I've heard her say this and I've heard other people say it before her, faith is a muscle. Faith is a muscle that you work out. Well, when you work out a muscle, you do things that are hard. You have resistance, you have weight. You sweat. You fail so that you can succeed. I believe it's time for us to be wrestlers. And we may make mistakes, we may be awkward, and we may be rough. But I think it's time for us to get ready to rumble. And I don't know what that means for us. But I want to find out. So, let's take off our rings. Whatever it is. I understand when a woman takes off her earrings, she's ready to throw down.
The heels.
What?
The shoes.
Shoes? Okay, shoes. Yeah, I don't know. Take off your preconceptions. And let's rumble with God and see what we find out. See if we find out who we are. See if we get a new name inside of our soul.